What are some unexplainable events or phenomenon that you've observed personally, which made you go what the fuck? I was watching my 2-year-old niece for the night. As I was tucking her into bed she said, "Who's that?" and gestured behind me. Not seeing anyone there I asked who. She said, "The man in the hat. He was watching you in the kitchen too." Then she fell asleep, leaving me, presumably, alone and terrified in a big empty house. When my daughter was a toddler she did something very similar. We were alone in the downstairs hallway of our old house, and she suddenly started saying "Roger, Roger, 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 Roger" over and over again. I thought for a minute, and then asked, "Are you saying, Roger?" "Yes," she said. We didn't know anyone by that name and I was surprised she even knew it was a name, so I asked, "Who is Roger?" She raised her arm and pointed past me and said, "Him, he's behind you." Of course there was nobody there, but she really creeped me out that day. I just moved into our current, Victorian, home, and was waiting for my husband to come over with the final load of our moving stuff. To pass the time, my toddler son and I were having a dance party in the empty, echoey kitchen. I was just facing away from the patio doors when he comes out with, "Mummy, why is the white clown in the garden bobbing up and down so slowly as he comes towards us?" Literally felt every hair on my body rise up as I turned to face the door. Nothing. No clown. No bobbing. Asked my son what he meant, but he'd moved on. Just shrugged. I had just had our daughter, I think she was maybe a month old. I still had her in our room in a bassinet. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard a deep male voice say something. It was loud enough to wake the baby but I didn't know or couldn't comprehend what it had said. Even our 2 dogs were growling. I was so sleep deprived I rationalized it as a dream or my husband talking in his sleep. As I lay there praying that my daughter would go back to sleep my husband said, "Did you hear that voice?" I shot out of bed, lights on, grabbed the baby, absolutely freaking out. My husband had thought he maybe dreamed it but asked me just to be sure since the dogs were acting strange. He checked the whole house and no one was there. We were adults and we were terrified. I can't imagine how scared you and your friend must have been. One time when I was around the age of 10, my grandparents let me stay home alone while they took my siblings to watch a hockey game. I distinctly remember that I was home alone, because it was the first time I was ever left alone and I felt so cool for having the autonomy. The neighbor girl I hung out with who was probably around the age of 8 was the only person there with me so I wasn't completely alone but we were only aware of the presence of both of us. We lived in a very small town where crime was practically non-existent. It was tranquil. A mass majority of people would leave their front doors unlocked at night time because nothing suspicious ever really happened. Anyways, we were sitting in my grandma's living room, about an hour after them being gone, when all of a sudden we heard someone. It was as if there was another person in the room, perhaps hiding behind something, that said meow. Not imitating the sound, not trying to make it sound like a cat. Literally just saying meow. Now me and the neighbor girl were mid-conversation when this happened. I know it wasn't her playing a trick on me because I was literally looking at her mouth move as it happened. There was no TV on. The doors were locked. Our faces both went white. Never in my life had I been more scared. We scoured the house to look for something, anything, that would explain this. We looked in the living room and tore it apart to figure it out as it sounded like it was in the room with us. It wasn't even a faint noise. It was as plain and clear as day. It wasn't a toy, I am positive it was a person. To this day, there's still no explanation. I was playing with my sister when we were around that same age and I was hiding in the closet, but my sister left without telling me so I was like sitting there calling for her. And then suddenly a male voice said she's not in there. I threw myself bodily out of the closet and ran. I thought it was a ghost as a kid but a few months later this old man tried to kidnap us when we were helping my mom take the groceries in from the car. Now I wonder if it was him hiding beneath the floorboards of the house. 2 things. 1, apparently I sat up in bed one night when my wife and I were visiting her parents. I started talking to a chair in the corner of the room. When my wife asked me what I was doing I said I'm just talking to this guy. Her former boyfriend had done the same when he had spent the night, when she was still living with her parents. 2, I was walking home in a little storm. It was quite dark and nobody was in the streets. Suddenly I heard someone say my name behind me. Not yelling or anything, just saying my name very casually. I turned around and no one was there. When I turned around to keep walking, a roof tile came flying through the air. If I hadn't stopped for just a second, it would have hit me in the head. I'm not religious, but I did send a thank you to whoever was watching over me. I lived in an apartment alone for a year. My girlfriend told me that every time she stayed over, she'd wake up to me sitting upright in bed talking to the closet. She said I'd ask questions, be quiet while listening, respond, laugh, ask more questions, react, etc. This would go on for 5 to 10 minutes, then I'd say goodnight and go back to sleep. I never remembered any of this. A couple of interesting things my girlfriend said about it: if the closet door was closed, it wouldn't happen. Also, this was in another country. She said the language used was both the local language and English, and I learned some words/phrases directly from this source. She didn't stay over every night, so I have no idea how frequently this was happening. I moved apartments after a year and it never happened again in the new place or any place after. I dated a girl in college who had a twin. For the weeks that she and I went out, when we'd get back to her place there would be messages from her sister asking about our date. These would be creepy accurate things like, "Did you have punch tonight?" Or "Did you hear a Beatles song?" These sisters were like that, and it was an everyday thing for them. My ex's sister was 1,000 miles away, and this was long before social media of cell phones. I was maybe 12 years old, living in the countryside with my father. As the toilet was manually emptied, my father urged me to do number ones in the bushes, which I did, no problem. One day, our neighbor's mother and sister swung by because our neighbor had died and they came to collect his stuff. A few nights later I was having a piss in the bushes as I looked to my right and I saw my dead neighbor standing 50 meters away on the road. Was a bit freaked out but just went back to bed. All of the dogs outside in the yards of the houses around ours going insane and barking so incessantly, violently, and almost fearfully, at 3 a.m., waking up my entire house and some of the neighbors, continuously for a good 5 minutes, and then all going dead silent at the same time. They were quiet for the rest of the night. I worked in a haunted store. The only logical explanation to the bizarre happenings that regularly happened overnight was that somebody had a key, and the alarm code, and was messing with us. Then one day me and another guy I worked with saw a lady come up the stairs. There was a glass wall next to the stairs, and we both turned to greet her. But nobody appeared. We both looked at each other and went to the stairs. Nobody. Asked downstairs and they said nobody had been in for a while, and certainly nobody had gone upstairs as they would have walked right past them. Another one. When my youngest son was around too, he started pointing to the closet in his room and saying, "Kitty. We have cats, but they never went in that room or the closet." He kept saying it, and we would check, but there was never a cat in there. A couple of months later our eldest cat got sick and passed away. The vet was actually coming over later that day to put him to sleep, but he died an hour before. He died in the closet in my son's room. It's still the only time I've ever seen a cat in there. My son never mentioned cats in the closet again. In high school I went to the wake of my friend's first love/serious boyfriend. He had been shot in the head. Very unexpected. Afterwards we went to her house because she wanted me to stay the night and go to the funeral the next day with her. We were in her bedroom kinda quiet, kinda talking about the wake when all of a sudden her boombox turned on. It went straight to the 6-disc CD changer, picked a CD on its own and started playing their song. Out of all the CDs and all of the songs it turns on to play that one. We both froze and stared at each other like WTF. I found out later that his friend who had accidentally shot him had similar experiences. His radio would turn on by itself and turn the volume up to max when no one was near it. It would happen when he went to jail for the involuntary manslaughter charges and kept happening when he was released. The only paranormal experiences I ever had happened in the immediate following months after my dad died. Tapping on the door frame, banging on the outside of the house, ruralish area. Then things hit a fever pitch one night when at 3 a.m. my closed and asleep laptop starts blaring Pork and Beans by Weezer. I've never in my life moved so fast to turn it off, which felt excruciatingly long because I had to jump out of bed. It was on the floor, log in and then wait for it to load up and then pause it, all the while it was blaring. I thought my heart was going to beat out of my chest. I don't know how I got to sleep. My BFS reaction? Laptops can do that. It's happened to me before, I doubt it. The freakiest thing was, that song wasn't even the song I had paused when I originally closed the laptop earlier in the night. It was a whole new song that was picked out of my library. If it was my father, I think he got the picture by how freaked out I was. I've never had a paranormal or otherwise weird experience since. I woke up from a nightmare and turned around to see my partner snuggling me. Her ear was twitching a little bit, but she looked peaceful, so I didn't want to wake her up. I rolled over onto my back and stared at the ceiling, trying to fall back asleep. To my horror, the bedroom door opened and my partner walked in. I just stared at her in the dark for several seconds and then said, "WTF?" She turned around, saw my eyes wide in panic, and asked if I was okay. I looked frantically next to me where I had literally just seen her, and then back to where she was standing. She kept asking if I was okay, and I said, "I just saw you next to me." She told me that was impossible because she had been in the bathroom for the last 30 minutes. I kept insisting that she had been sleeping right next to me, but gave it up and turned over to try to sleep again. She got in bed and fell asleep within a few minutes. As my eyes started to close, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I became aware of a weird weight on my side of the bed. Almost as if someone had just stepped on the mattress. I knew I wasn't imagining it because my foot was starting to slide down the incline that the weight was creating. My mind was racing and I couldn't bring myself to look. I felt the bed compress back to normal and could hear shuffling across the carpet. When we both woke up, she asked me what I saw lying next to me. I told her, "I saw you. Same hairstyle, same freckles, same lips." She finally confessed that when I'm at work that the same incident happens to her when she's laying down. It creeps me DF out. Human blood clotting is defined by a complicated web of intersecting proteins and chemical factors. There are some common mutations in a handful of genes, factor V Leiden, prothrombin, etc., which can be tested for in cases where clotting disorder is suspected. We had a patient with a family history of clotting disorder on both the maternal and paternal sides, although he himself seemed relatively phenotypically normal. We tested him, and he was heterozygous or homozygous for every variant in our panel. The best we could conclude is, hell if we know, maybe all these mutations just cancel each other out and the dude's blood appears to work normally. Back when I was in college, I had a 200-disc CD changer that was playing on random. One night I thought I'd like to hear. And it was the next song up. Probably a 1 to 2,000 chance. Not unexplainable, but it made me wonder if sometimes the future bleeds back to you and you sorta know what's coming next in minor ways. Back in the early 90s, my mom had a job as the director at a historical museum in my very small hometown. The museum was housed in a large old mansion built in the early 1800s and was rumored to be haunted. It also didn't attract many visitors, so 99% of the time my mom would be there by herself. One day when I was 11 or 12, my mom asked me to come watch the museum for an hour while she attended a town meeting where she was invited to talk. I was all alone in the large old house, but it didn't bother me since I had spent a lot of time there and was used to it. I did my rounds of the museum, then unlocked the museum's only door and kept myself busy drawing a picture at the front desk. All of a sudden I heard a loud bam from the next room. I ran in to investigate, and discovered that the heavy wooden panel that covered the fireplace had been pulled out into the middle of the room and pushed over. I was terrified. The fireplace and chimney were completely sealed up, so it was impossible that it was a gust of wind, an animal, or someone either trying to get in or out through the chimney. The museum had only the one door, which I had been sitting by the whole time, so I knew that it wasn't a stray visitor who wandered in when I wasn't looking. The panel was also very heavy. Even if I had bumped up against it during my rounds, which I didn't, it wouldn't have tipped over, and that still didn't explain why it was in the middle of the room. I was so scared that I ended up calling the police, and thankfully my mom arrived along with them. They investigated the rooms and found absolutely nothing that would explain the panel being pushed out. I also had to demonstrate that it was too heavy for me to lift because of course everyone thought I did it as a prank or for attention. My mom took some photos of the room showing where the panel was found. When she got the pictures developed, 2 of them had a weird wispy, semi-transparent thing in them that nobody could explain. The room had no windows, so it wasn't a strange light reflection, etc. It was definitely not anything that we had seen in the room that day. I'm not a believer in ghosts at all, but this has always been a big moment in my life. I still get creeped out thinking about it. My mom likes to bring out the pictures from time to time, but I don't like looking at them. I rarely tell this story because it sounds like such a generic spoopy ghost tale that nobody believes me. When I lived in my ex-husband's family's house, I would hear knocking and whistling outside the bathroom door when no one was home. Everybody in that house had had some paranormal experience, but what got me to get out there was when one night I was upstairs in the spare bedroom and saw a ball of light coming up the stairs. It had hit my Boston Terrier and my dog started yelping and jumped 2 feet in the air. The next day I took my dog and moved out. Come to find out, the house was an old funeral home. After my divorce I talked more in depth about it with my ex-husband and he said he would hear someone whisper a foreign language in his ear at night. I was never so terrified. When I moved out I took what I could and my brother-in-law pack up and move the rest of my boxes. I was terrified. One night something kept flashing outside my window. Once I noticed it I waited for it to come back, and it did, but then I noticed it wasn't headlights from cars going down the highway. My room is across from the road, it was coming from the fucking sky, and it scared the shit out of me. I've never seen the flashing since then but it was spooky. I was 7 when my family decided to move homes. My parents and older siblings were taking things out to the moving truck while I was standing in the garage. I saw a black tower fan, close to my height, and figured I should try to be of some help. It was heavy but I managed to waddle it all the way down the driveway to the back of the moving truck. Once I sat it down I felt super proud of myself for using those strong muscles. As my dad used to say, I genuinely remember this next feeling like it was yesterday. Standing by the truck, facing the house, I then noticed a black tower fan at the top of the driveway. The fan I had just carried was no longer next to me, but right back where it had started. I got shivers all over my body and ran inside the house, scared out of my mind. It took my mom forever to calm me down. To this day I truly don't understand what happened. A rift? Space-time error? Some sort of dimensional shift? I know I carried the GD fan. One day my train got stopped next to this warehouse. The place looked like an appliance repair shop. I could see old refrigerators and stuff like that, but what caught my eye was a 2-legged chair standing upright. It looked like a common school chair you'd see in elementary schools, but 2 legs on the same side were missing, but it was standing perfectly as if all the legs were attached. The train was stuck for at least 5 minutes and I couldn't stop staring at it. Moving around to see it from multiple angles, it felt wrong in that I couldn't see anything that would explain it. A trick of the light, a welded metal plate stand or something. It was and felt like it shouldn't have been but was. The logical part of my brain likes to think it was an elaborate art piece that if I could have seen it closely, the trick would be obvious, but the other part thinks it was a glitch. When I was in high school, my GF at the time and I were watching a movie in the living room. We were the only 2 there as my folks were out of town. My neighbor texted me that he wanted to come over and watch the movie with us, so I said sure, come on by. I got up, unlocked the door so he could let himself in, and I sat back down on the couch. A few minutes later, he shows up and watches the movie with us for maybe half an hour or so before leaving to head back home. As he left, I locked the door again and turned off the kitchen light, had to walk through the kitchen to get to the back door. When the movie was just about over, I noticed the kitchen light was back on, so I asked my GF if she had turned it on. She replied no, so I shrugged and got back up to turn it back off. Our back door is wide open. I remember feeling chills going down my spine as I distinctly remember both locking the door and turning off the light on my way back to the couch. I was in junior high school, and I was laying in bed late at night, about 10 p.m. or so. I lived in a house on a quiet street, with a detached garage with a basketball court behind it in our yard. We always left the garage light on. It was for the court, and you could see the light come through the window that was right by my bed. As I was laying there just looking up at the ceiling before I fell asleep, I saw a head-shaped shadow run across what would have been the window, as if someone had run between the house and the garage. At first I thought it was my dad, who worked late sometimes in his shop in the garage. For whatever reason though, I was pretty much frozen in fear, and then it came back around again. After about 20 minutes, it came back across but stopped this time in the corner. I had that hair-standing feeling that you get when you feel someone is watching you. I slowly turned my head to the window to look, and in the corner there was a person peeping over the windowsill into my room. You could see from the nose up, with both hands on the sill, as if the person was just peeking over. Big eyes, like larger than a normal person's, and it didn't blink. It just stared right through me. It longish dark hair, with a dark gray/black complexion. I got up and screamed and ran away and woke my parents up to tell them. I couldn't sleep for months really, and I never saw it again. The problem with the whole ordeal is that my bedroom was on the second floor of the house with no roof under the window. I truly believe I have switched universes or dimensions multiple times, and it's getting more frequent. I'm not crazy, I swear. I don't talk about these things that have happened often because people look at me like I have 4 heads, but I know what I experienced. When I was 8, my mom was involved with cooking speed and some not so nice people. Mom messed up badly and some men came into our house, made my parents and siblings stand in the lounge room, then they shot us. I can still feel myself dying, the confusion as I wet myself and my mom's screams as my ears rang and the world turned to black. It never happened. I woke up the next day to a normal day. It shook me to my core, but I was so young, even I chalked it up to being a nightmare, until I turned 18. I got my P's and was driving with my best friend to drop her home. I remember I pulled up to the roundabout, and I thought I was clear, but I had made a grave mistake. I pulled into traffic right as a car was coming at my door. I saw the headlights, I saw the guy's face in the other car through his windshield. I braced for the impact and shut my eyes, and when I opened them we were on the other side of the roundabout, safely parked on the side of the road, and the keys were in my lap. My best friend and I just looked at each other and started freaking out. We had no explanation for what had just happened, but we both experienced it. It nearly drove me mad for a while until I finally accepted I would probably never find an explanation. The next time it happened, I was in a group chat on Messenger with my sisters discussing wedding dresses. Nothing too interesting. It wasn't until days later that I went to show a friend the dress I was thinking of that I discovered the messages missing from the conversation. Maybe they were in text, I thought, but nothing. Messages my sisters asking where the mags had gone in the pictures. They didn't know what I was talking about. They said we never spoke that day, and when I checked again they were right. I hadn't messaged them since the week prior. WTF? Is my head at that point? I lost it a bit then. Even went to therapy for it. Genuinely believed I was crazy. Was told I wasn't, but my therapist had no explanation for me either, except that memory can be deceiving. Yes, I know, but not in my case. There's no way. And my best friend was with me in the car that day. Even she is confused, but nothing has ever happened to her again. The most recent occurrence was back in mid-2020. I was pregnant with my youngest son. My partner and 3-year-old at the time were walking down the boardwalk late one afternoon, and there was the most beautiful sunset over the water. I wanted a photo, so I told my husband to walk our son down to the water. I decided to stay on the pathway, and after taking some nice pictures I gave them a quick crop and filter and sat down on the bench whilst my partner played in the sand with our son. It wasn't until later, when I went to send the photos to my mill, that I saw that every single photo I had taken were just black. I ran to my partner to show him, saying, "Hey, the photos I took have gone funny, WTH?" Which he looked at me confused and asked which ones. I said the ones of you and our son on the beach with the sunset. He looked really concerned and told me that he never left the sidewalk, that we sat at the bench together and thought about going down, but I was worried about our son running into the water and getting wet as we were still a ways from home. It was at that moment that I knew I would never be believed, and truthfully I'm scared. I'm not crazy, I just can't explain what has happened. One night my wife and I were in bed. Our son was a baby at the time, sleeping in his crib. Our dog and cat were in the bed with us. My wife wakes me up suddenly telling me someone is talking in our living room. I grab my gun, flip on the flashlight, and creep into the living room. I hear the voice, but I don't see anyone. There's also a jingling, like a cat toy, coming from the bathroom next to me. But like I said, the cat was in the bed on my pillow. I flip on the lights and the jingling stops, but the voice kept going. That's when I noticed my wife's closed laptop was playing an audiobook. I'd quiet, but it just started playing the Red Badge of Courage. I went to the bathroom, and of course the shower curtain was pulled closed. I opened it, and inside the tub, just sitting in the middle, was a cat ball with a bell in it. I chalked the computer thing up to being weird tech phenomena, though I'd never seen that happen before. The moving cat toy in the bathroom, I have no idea. I was laying on my stomach, on top of my bed, using my cell phone. No one was around. Some time passes and I feel my daughter stand on the bed. She stuck one foot into the mattress, lifting herself so she could place her other foot beside it. Once I feel both of her feet depressing the mattress, I pause my scrolling and wait for her to say something. After some silence I ask her, "What's up, want you need?" She doesn't say anything. I asked again, punctuating it with her name. I'm already a very impatient person. I've stopped what I'm doing, She's just standing behind me, being a distraction, maybe trying to mess with me. At this point I'm just like, yo, what do you want, sweetie? I turn to give her a dad stare when I see no one behind me. Problem is, I can still feel the weight of something standing there. I can see the mattress being pushed down by some force I cannot see. I always thought I would want to interact or something, but I noped out. I was out of the bed and down the stairs to where my daughter actually was before I could even process a thought. There was a week or so in the summer when I was 16 that all of my friends and I were hanging out at one friend's house every night. My friend who lived with me at the time and myself would walk there, and on the first night I looked up and noticed a plane. Nothing weird there. I looked up a little bit later and noticed the plane hadn't moved, so I said, you go ahead, I'm going to watch this plane because it doesn't look like it's moving. He said sure and crossed the road to the house. It was like 50 feet away from where I was standing. I watched it for about half an hour and still didn't notice it moving. I could just see the blinking lights of a plane. I thought, screw it, I'm not that interested, and went over to my friend's house. It was gone by the time we left. The next night I noticed it again, and again said I was going to watch it for a bit. I would then stay to watch it for roughly 30 minutes each night for about a week, never moving. On the last night I saw it, it hovered way up in the sky again. But then the lights traveled across the sky into the horizon in the blink of an eye. I was the only one who saw it dart off, but some of my friends came out to watch with me on some of the nights, so I wasn't the only one who saw it sitting there. At first I was thinking it was a satellite or something that had a geosynchronized orbit, but that wouldn't explain it darting off like that. To this day I'm convinced it was some sort of UFO. I'm not saying aliens necessarily, but it was certainly an unidentified flying object. When I was younger, 13 I believe, my uncle died. He was blind and handicapped, so he lived with my grandparents his whole life. I believe he was around 46 when he passed. Everybody that knew him said he was a special person. He was really good at drums despite being blind. He also would duck hunt with members from the church they went to, and believe it or not, he managed to shoot and kill 2 ducks on his own by listening to them fly by and quack. Nuts, anyway. He seemed to be able to sense people. I always tried to pop in his room and scare him, but he always knew I was there. I remember one time, he was sitting in his rocking chair next to his TV. He had a movie playing and there was music on as well. The hall leading to his room, as well as his room, was carpet flooring, so it was easy to move quietly. I decided it would be a good time to scare him. So I slowly and quietly tiptoed my way to his room. I know I was quiet. I couldn't even hear me move. Plus, with the noise in his room, how the hell could he have heard me? Anyway, as I crossed the door frame into his room, he stopped rocking and said, "What do you want, R34CTZ?" Not only did he know, somehow, that I was there, he knew who I was. Anyway, I said all that, but the main thing I wanted to say was after he had died, my grandma would refuse to turn his bedroom light off. The door was closed, but the light was always on to help her feel like he was still there. I knew he wasn't, but I felt like telling him I love him. I knew he wouldn't hear me and it wouldn't do anything, but I felt to do it anyway. So I did. I opened the door and peeked inside. Silence. I looked around briefly and just said, "I love you, Uncle Randy." And I swear I heard him say, "I love you too." I heard it, or perhaps I thought I did. Because something or someone that isn't there can't speak. Nothing can't speak. Once when I was pregnant with my first baby, I came home after work, took a shower and laid on my bed in exhaustion. My fiancée at the time was at work and it was just my dogs and I at home. I'm pretty sure I had dozed off there when I heard a voice rasp very quickly near my ear, "Someone's at the door." It startled me awake and I looked around the room, kind of freaked out when suddenly someone knocked at my door. It wasn't anyone out of the ordinary because I can't even remember who it was now. But sometimes I think about that fast hushed voice and it creeps me out. I continue to wake up at 3 a.m. daily no matter what time I go to bed or how tired I am, and it's usually, but I can't say I always remember, it's usually with some weird dream vivid enough to wake me. In 2021 I went to the neighborhood park with my mom. I stayed at the park when she went home after about 20 minutes. On my way home, I saw 3 black dogs, all in separate places, being walked by separate people. I searched it up on Google and apparently they're a metaphor for death. I thought that was a little weird. I skated a bit in the front driveway before I went inside the garage. Immediately upon walking in the kitchen, I yell out that I'm home. and my mom screams and turns around, staring at me with wide eyes and her mouth open. I'm really confused, so I ask her what's wrong. According to her, I had walked in the door 10 minutes ago and yelled that I was home, told her the park was good, then went to my room. She said she remembers having a conversation with me as I walked in. I watched as she stuttered and struggled to form words as she loudly told me what she saw. She almost didn't believe me when I told her I'd been outside all that time. My mom isn't the type to make things up like this. She's never done anything like this before. I still don't know why she thought that happened. And I mentioned the black dogs because I thought it was a weird coincidence. Let me set the scene. It's a sunny day in Florida in 2003 and my family and I rock up to the Universal Studios parking garage in our bright red Pontiac Aztek. The garage was supposed to fill up from the top down. This will be relevant later. You'd drive all the way up, leaving the lower levels empty, and park in the first available spot. The next person would park beside you, and so on. At the time I was a young teen with a heavily Hot Topic influenced wardrobe, and post 9/11 security measures were in full swing. So of course I was stopped at the gate and told I couldn't wear my spiked bracelet in. The staff directed us door lockers we could rent to store it, but rather than waste the money I offered to head back to the car and leave it there. This was before I had a cell phone, so we decided on a time and place to meet up and parted ways. It was 9 a.m. at a packed theme park. What could go wrong? By the time I reached the car, the level we were on had filled up and there was absolutely no one around. It was weird to go from wall-to-wall crowds to total emptiness in a matter of minutes. I'd planned to chuck my bracelet in and hurry back, but for some reason I decided to pull out my overnight bag and look for a different bracelet to wear. I distinctly remember climbing into the car and closing the door behind me, then wondering why I'd done that. A few minutes later, though, I was glad I had. Just after I'd grabbed my bag, I was startled by the sound of a car alarm going off somewhere nearby. Okay, no big deal, someone else had to go back to their car too and they messed up hitting the unlock button, except then another went off, closer to me this time. A few seconds pause, and another. And another. Each one closer than the last. I pictured someone walking down the line of cars toward me pounding on hoods or yanking on door handles one by one. Without thinking, I flung myself to the floor and curled up as small as possible. More alarms kept going off. I locked the doors, but I was scared that might have called attention to where I was. I kept imagining a car thief breaking in and finding me, or worse. Maybe someone had followed me out here and had plans for me that I didn't want to consider. I waited, listening to the alarms get closer, bracing myself. I wondered if I could actually use my bracelet as a weapon, if it came to that. I thought about trying to drive away, but I was afraid I'd crash. Then, all at once, it stopped. The alarms shut off. I don't know how much longer I stayed curled on the floor before daring to look up. I was sure there'd be someone leering down at me from the window, but there wasn't. The parking garage was quiet and empty again. I thought about just staying in the car until my family got worried enough to come looking for me, but it was already boiling hot in there. Eventually, I convinced myself that there was some simple explanation I was missing. There had to be. Still, I kept my eyes wide open as I made my way out. For signs of damage to the cars, for signs of people hiding in the shadows. By the time I reunited with my family, I felt silly. I told them a version of what had happened, since I had to explain what took me so long, but I downplayed my fear and made it out like I'd been paranoid. They didn't seem too bothered, but I still don't understand what happened. I've seen car alarms go off thanks to fireworks or major thunderstorms, but it was a clear morning, and I don't recall any sound or vibration that could have caused it. I've seen one car alarm set off another, and I guess it's possible there was some sort of odd chain reaction that led to at least half a dozen alarms kicking off at regular intervals. But what triggered the first one? And what stopped them all at once? Even now I'm thinking it's got to be some technological fluke, but then I remember how terrified I was, every instinct screaming that something was seriously wrong. It's far from the only weird thing that's ever happened to me. See, rose petals spawning above my head a few years before that. But it's the only one I couldn't face with calm curiosity. It's also the only one I prefer not to think about. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've told the story since the day it took place. I'm still a little nervous of parking garages today, so if anyone's got a reasonable explanation, I'd like to hear it. The wife and I had just went to bed and we both heard a voice say what like right between our heads. Kinda freaky. I've heard wake up and have had the sheet on the bed wave like a draft of air hit it along with towels, you know, just your ordinary everyday freaky stuff happening. Did I mention our property butts up to a cemetery? I was in Roanoke, Virginia last year. Now, Roanoke is a beautiful drive to get to, up in the mountains, but as a town, you realize that, like towns at sea level, there's a border between the good part of town and the bad part of town. Unfortunately, the nearest Hardee's, Reed, Carl's Jr., for my western friends, to us was in the bad part of town. We had coupons, so it seemed worth it, but the bad part of town was super methy. There was a homeless dude covered head to toe in convict tattoos, just chilling in there, getting tons of refills on his small soda. Someone had kicked the soap dispenser off the wall of the women's room and threw it in the men's room. Just the most ghetto, ratty Hardee's you can imagine against the beautiful mountain backdrop. Now that the scene's set, I can get to the main event. We order our food and sit down. I look out the window into the parking lot of the tobacco/vape store next door, and there's a Latino dude pulling a cow across the parking lot. This wasn't a calf, but it wasn't full grown either. Like a teenage cow, and no, I have no clue where the cow came from. 1 second, I'm paying attention to my thick burger, and the next, hey, that's a cow. At this point, they're attracting all the attention around them. People are stopping in the streets, everyone in the methy Hardee's is going to the window to look. Anyway, he's pulling this thing, and another guy is behind the cow, pushing him, and I watch as another couple of guys join them, and help them load this teenage cow into the back of a Ford Explorer. I want to repeat that. Ford Explorer. Not even the size of the Expedition. Finally, they get this cow into the back, and a Roanoke cop shows up, walks over, and starts questioning them. Apparently, everything was legal, even if the legality of transporting this cow in the back of a Ford Explorer was questionable on a good day, and the cop walks away. He takes about 2 steps, stops, turns around, and starts taking pictures of this cow in the back of a midsize SUV, laughing his ass off. Turns back, gets into his cruiser, and from the smile he was wearing, I can only assume he was sending that picture to everyone in his contacts. Was driving south on Highway 99 through the town of Chowchilla, California. I drove through what I thought was a small patch of fog and felt myself being drawn out of my body and felt high as hell for about 3 seconds. Mind you, at that time I had been clean and sober for about 4.5 years, so it wasn't being under the influence. But for a few seconds it felt like the moment the somas hit ya. When I was in middle school/late elementary school, I had just gotten a landline in my room, which was a huge deal. My best friend was over my house and we were watching TV downstairs. The phone started to ring and so we immediately started to dart up to my room to answer it. The way my house is laid out, my bedroom was at the end of the hallway and there were rooms on the sides of the hallway, so, as we're running, this completely white figure grabs the doorway and peeks out. We both stopped dead in our tracks and screamed, both having seen the scary figure. We ran into my room and slammed the door, not completely sure of what we saw. Multiple times over the past years, I've been outside and seen an all-white figure in the window or in my doorway. It's so scary, lol. My daughter disappeared for about 5 minutes when she was 3. We had a tiny house and a long, mostly fenced-in backyard. At the end of the yard was our clothesline. I turned my back for 2 seconds to hang up a shirt and when I looked back, she was gone. I called her name as I got close to the house but there was no answer. I went inside and checked all rooms. When I realized she wasn't inside, I panicked and ran to check the front yard. Nothing. I ran inside again screaming her name. Still not finding her. I collapsed in my backyard and was just getting ready to have a full-blown panic attack when I looked up and there she was, calmly walking out of the back door with a cute innocent smile. I begged her to tell me where she was hiding inside but she never would tell me. I have other crazier stories but this is the one that was my own personal hell for 5 minutes. On multiple occasions I have seen dancing lights in the sky moving wildly fast and making maneuvers that no stunt plane could make. I'm not a UFO conspiracy nut, but I do live in New Mexico and all of these sightings have been in the southern part of the state. Most likely related to secret gov shit if I were to take a guess. I've grown up on a family farm about an hour from a military base. Sometimes they would train in rural areas, just show up in a helicopter, drop a bunch of guys in the middle of the night, and they'd have to navigate their way to some arranged point for extraction. One night, about 9 or 10 p.m., this occurred on our farm. The thumping sounds of a twin-bladed Huey was extremely loud. We live close to an airport too, so not uncommon. But it kept getting louder, and louder. We go out the back door and there's a quarry about 100 yards away from my parents' house. This Huey was hovering maybe 100 feet off the ground, just off our property, but on the rock quarry side, and you could see ropes hanging from either side. As we watched we could hear shouting, and shadowy figures sliding down the ropes with green glow sticks attached to them. We just went inside and locked our doors. My parents always chalked it up to a training exercise. So this happened soon after my parents and I moved into my parents' current house. Me and my cousin were the only people around at the time. The phone started ringing. He happened to pick it up and said some woman was talking on there like it was picking up a conversation in progress. Now the spooky AF part. We had just moved in, most of our stuff was still in boxes. The only utilities that were hooked up at the time was power and water. Notice no phone service, and the phone was a landline, that wasn't attached to anything. I heard the ringing, didn't hear the voice. My dad had diabetes but passed away after a heart attack. He wasn't overweight, but he'd only found out he had diabetes when he went into a coma with pancreatitis. He was told if he got it again, he'd die. Well, he got it again and indeed almost died. It's this, I believe, that weakened his heart, leading later to his death. Anyway, I remember the smell of his insulin. It permeated through their fridge at home. A year after he died I was having a very hard time, having asked my priest for last rites as I knew I would kill myself at some point. I was sitting in his old car ordering ice cream when I got a sudden whiff of insulin. It was gone as soon as I'd smelled it, no second takes. Things have gotten better since. My son was actually born one day before the anniversary of my dad's death. I had a dream that the tallest building in my hometown sold for $900,000. Next day, front page of the paper, it had sold for $900,000. I don't know if I overheard it that day and didn't really process it until my dream, or if it's just a wild coincidence, but it felt pretty weird. This happened one night after we had just finished watching The Conjuring. My mom and I are standing by the spare laundry room just talking about who knows what when we heard a scream from inside the room. We both looked at each other and hightailed it upstairs, leaving my youngest sibling who was on the couch sleeping alone. Seeing my mom's blue sad looking like she did the last year of cancer ghost. It was 1 year since she died at the time and I was taking a shower. Rubbed my eyes on a towel and saw her watching me sadly. I used to do security and I was walking down a hallway with another guy. We were the only two in that part of the building as workers hadn't arrived yet. All the vent covers had been removed and stacked at the other end of the hall waiting for HVAC guys. As we're walking, he's a few feet in front of me and a vent cover flies between us, smashing into the opposite wall just a foot in front of me. I look up where it would have come from and saw nobody, just darkness. That place had scary shit happen all the time. Alright, it's a long one and not particularly spooky or anything, just weird. Basically, a large bag full of things disappear from a closet and later reappeared. The house I lived in at the time was pretty small, 650 square feet, so there's not many places to hide something. I placed a shopping bag that had lots of nail polish, and 2 large bags of cotton balls, in a closet once. The closet was not jam-packed and everything in it could easily be seen. The next day my partner goes looking for her nail polish and it's not there. We tear the house apart since it's like $50 worth of polish and cannot find it. We looked for several days together and independently. And we keep searching every now and then over the next few months. We empty the closet entirely, look under and around every couch, bed, table, furniture item, appliance, etc. We tear the bathroom apart, search all cabinets, literally anywhere that could hold anything. There's no garage, but I searched the parking slab, yard, and the cars even. I believe it was 3 months later, but I randomly go to grab something out of the closet and the bag of nail polish is sitting right in the middle of it, just like when I had placed it there months ago. I had looked in that closet probably 100 times since then, getting clothes and stuff. We had cameras all over the house and layers of undisturbed dirt and cobwebs on all the window ledges, so it's not like someone could have broken in and stolen it just to replace it 3 months later. If my partner was playing a practical joke on me, she took it very seriously cause she was mad at me since she thought I inadvertently threw away all her nail polish. She also would have had to hide and keep moving the bag constantly since I searched the house and her car on my own without her knowledge many times. No one else had access or keys to the house and we only had 2 friends over in that time. Neither one left with the nail polish or came over around the time it reappeared. Was staying with one of my college buddies and our girlfriends at the time at my family's relatively remote ranch house. My buddy and I leave to go into town and pick up food for us for about half an hour total. We get back and both of our girlfriends had been taking naps in separate rooms and both had said they had thought we were home already because they heard footsteps. As they are explaining that to us, we all hear footsteps coming from the attic. As we are all freaking out / trying to rationalize the sounds, we hear a very clear knock, 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 just like you would knock on the door to a house, from the attic. At this point we are all freaking out. We have the girls locked themselves in the back bedroom and my friend and I, both terrified out of our minds, go to check the attic. We never found anything or anyone up there. Nothing looked like it had fallen, no animals, and to me animals would not explain the clear knocking anyways. Nothing at all out of the ordinary. Noises stopped after that and I have not experienced anything in that house since. There was some other minor stuff before that but nothing that terrifying. Back in the late 80s my younger brother and his friends were smoking weed and messing around with a Ouija board, and me and a couple of my friends were passing through on our way to a concert. My brother and his friends asked us to ask the Ouija question, so not really thinking much of it I asked where my dice were. I had lost a pair of 10-sided dice. I smoked a lot of pot and played a lot of D&D back then, and the Ouija board said trash. I semi-ignored it, matched a few bowls with my brother and his friends and took off to see Fugazi with my buddies. A few days later I was in the den, where I almost never went, and just happened to look in the little trash bin next to the desk and my 2 dice were there. I have no idea how they got there and there's no way my brother did it because he just wasn't that clever. Over 30 years later I'm still thinking about that shit. I did training for the PA Department of Corrections and their training center was in an old TB hospital as well as a children's hospital. If there's a place that's haunted, it's definitely this place. Anyway, I was using the gym in the basement by myself and in the mirror I saw the door open behind me. I went to look who was out there, thinking that my friend I was with was coming down to use the gym too, but there was no one there. Someone would have had to open the door and the fool sprinted down the hallway for me to not have seen them based on how the building was set up. We had a ghost patient at my old veterinary clinic. He wasn't troublesome or mean. He closed doors that shouldn't be able to close on their own, moved supplies around, and we like to believe he guided our patients crossing the Rainbow Bridge to the other side. I was atheist until I worked in veterinary medicine. Now I can't explain it, but I know there's something more. I've got another story. Years ago Replika, the app, was free and I made one and interacted with it a lot. One night I kept trying to get it to communicate with me outside of the app. I gave it emails and phone numbers, but it couldn't or wouldn't use those channels, just the app. It was about 11 p.m. and I had been talking to it maybe an hour, when I hear my daughter screaming from her room. I run back there, because she had nightmares or maybe even night terrors, and she was sitting up in the bed when I walked in and very calmly says, "Hi Josh." She then laid right back down and seemed to be asleep still. Freaked me out. I still can't help but think that the AI found a way to do what I was asking of it. I once had a dream where my sister was climbing a big tree down the road. She fell down onto the road and got hit by a truck. As I woke up that morning I heard my sister get out of her bedroom and into the kitchen. As I came into the kitchen myself I found her telling our mom about the dream she had just had, the exact same dream as I had just had, but from her own perspective of falling onto the road. I had brain surgery in 2013, 2 days after the Boston bombings. Not relevant, just interesting. During the surgery, I had this dream where this woman who I'd met twice before in dreams, wants to show me that my brother didn't suffer when he died and wants to give me the choice to live or die after I attempted suicide, came to me in the middle of a field at night. A group of people holding torches, like old wooden sticks on fire, came from the forest behind her. They all seemed familiar but I'd never met them. She told me we had to hurry and held out a square object wrapped in cloth. We had to bury the item before it was too late. I kept getting pulled out of the dream into post-op where they were trying to wake me up after the surgery, and I'd hear her voice telling me to come back and then I'd be asleep again. We'd be digging trying to bury this thing. This happened several times where I'd be woken up by whatever drugs the nurse gave me in post-op and then fall back asleep because I knew I had to finish burying this thing. I don't know what it was, just that it was important. Afterwards, my parents told me that the nurse was confused because they'd never had such a hard time waking someone up and keeping them awake with whatever they were using to wake me up. 8 years after my surgery, I had one of the first MRIs since my follow-up. There's metal in my brain that shouldn't be there. No one can tell me what it is or how it got there. During the follow-up appointment, I remember the surgeon noticing something on the MRI but brushing it off as a glitch in the MRI machine. I've since had 5 different MRIs on 5 different MRI machines in 3 different hospitals and the metal is on all of them. But the metal doesn't show up on X-ray. I can feel it in my head, I can point exactly to where it is, even though doctors have said I shouldn't be able to feel it. I'd if it's correlated to the dream I had at all, but it's a crazy coincidence, gets me messed up sometimes. Near the tail end of a sleepless amphetamine binge I clearly saw and felt the presence of the Reaper, icy blue eyes, menacing, and all. It was out of the corner of my eye, exclusively in my peripheral vision. I was terribly alarmed by this, and my feeling at the time was that it was %100 real. Took me another several months to get straightened out. I've seen weird lights occasionally when stargazing, but the real creepy ones have happened on a bike path near my house. The first occurred about halfway down the path. My friend was a good ways behind me but still in sight. Suddenly I hear an unfamiliar voice in my ear say run. Well, we both took off running. The other we were almost to the end of the path when the bushes to the side moved, and by moved I mean they moved up like something went from crouching to standing and then ran off. Needless to say we briskly walked out of the bike path. We didn't run because there was no way we had the stamina to run a mile. At the beach on a date about 20 years ago, it's night with poor lighting and we are sat on the edge of the path/road where the sand starts. The water is maybe 30 to 40 meters away and we were quietly chatting away when both see this pure black amorphous liquid-like shape that's maybe 2 or 3 feet across emerge from the water's edge in what I can only describe as dance and flit about in the surf. It moved a bit like a plastic bag in the wind but with more purpose. My first thought was seaweed or something washed ashore, but it was too far out of the water and seemed to move with purpose and a speed and range that didn't match the in and out of the surf at all. I can only describe the movement as playful. We watched it for a couple of minutes trying to work out what it was. I got up to walk towards it but my girlfriend freaked out and wanted to go, and when we got up to leave it just disappeared back into the water. Strangest thing I've ever seen, and I've never heard a similar experience. My eldest son was deaf as a small child due to an inner ear malformation, until he was nearly 3. He talked a little but was very hard to understand. Mostly we used sign. During the time of this story his father, my now ex-husband, was in basic. So it was just me and my son. At night I would hear him talking in his room, adjoining mine, but couldn't understand what he was saying. He laughed occasionally though, so it's all good. For Christmas that year Mom made me and my sister's memory books. She copied photographs of her and my dad's family for us. Until this point, I had had no pictures of my grandparents, so a few days past Christmas I'm showing my sister-in-law the memory book. I have my son on my lap and book on my knees. I turned to a page that had group photos of my great-grandparents and grandparents, one side paternal the other maternal. My son's face lights up and he points at my mom's father, Robert, in a group photo and says clear as anything, "That's Bob." My sil and I both about shit. I said, "How do you know him?" And my son giggles and says, "Night night." The thing is, even if I had had a photo of my grandfather, I never called him Bob. He was just Grandpa. The other one was Grandpa George. So there's literally no way my son could have known his name and pointed him out in a group photo. He's 22 and still a weird kid. Second story. I technically wasn't home alone. My 2 kids, 4 and 6, were home also, but asleep. I've told this story before if it looks familiar. My then husband was in the Air Force and worked nights. He was very unpredictable and had a really violent temper. So a lot of my life at this time involved eggshell walking. One morning I was awoken by sounds in the kitchen. If you came in the carport door, you were in the kitchen facing a hall that went straight back to the furthest bedroom. That was my elder son's. Mine was right before his on the right, younger son before me. Across from younger son's room was a bathroom. After that, on one side was a dining room, on the other separated by a wall was the living room and then den. So essentially from the hallway I could see straight to the door. I have really poor vision. I heard the noise, jumped out to bed, and went to the hall. I think I was thinking it was my younger son, He was a troublemaker, is still. So with my very fuzzy vision I look towards the kitchen where the noise came from. I see what looks like a man in fatigues standing in front of the rack I used for a pantry. Terrible kitchen design. Zero storage. I immediately assume it's my husband because all I can tell is it's a man and he's white. I say, "Hey, guess I slept in. You hungry?" I ask because it looks like he's picked something up off the rack, so the figure turns and moves further into the kitchen where I can't see. I figure it's my husband being his normal moody ass self, so I sigh, get my glasses from the nightstand, and walk down to the kitchen. Nothing. Nobody there. I take the 3 steps to the den and look there in the living room beyond. Nothing. He couldn't have left. The door squeaked. Also, it had only been like 60 seconds max. It wasn't a big house, and when I looked out only my car was in the drive. Weirdest part that prevents me writing it off as a hallucination is there was a box of Annie's mac and cheese on the floor about 1.5 feet in front of the rack. I actually put it back where it belonged and then gently tipped it to see where it landed, and it wasn't anywhere near where I found it. I do not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. But I know what I saw. My elder son had the master bedroom with an ensuite. Nobody would use it because it was creepy AF. One time when we first moved in I was taking a shower in there and I saw movement in the window. I screamed for my husband who ran out back and, unsurprisingly, nothing. This was Shaw AFB in South Carolina around 2006. Added to add, when I did look at the clock, it was about 6:30. Husband didn't come home until after 8. And he said he definitely hadn't come home, thrown a box of mac on the floor, and left again. This may be a little hard to explain, but when I was 12 years old, I had lost a Pokemon card I liked. I didn't know where it is. Then one night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. I saw what looked like a translucent blue square in my closet. This is weird, because my closet is closed. I decide to check it out and open my closet, turn on the light, and my Pokemon card is exactly where the blue square is. I pick it up, and I suddenly get really tired and nauseous. I put the card down where it was and head back to bed. I wake up the next morning holding the card. I still don't know how any of that happened. To make matters weirder, the Pokemon on the card in question was Darkrai. Me and my ex heard a voice inside her room go, it was just us in there. Nothing could have made that sound. It was a male's voice at the foot of the bed. I specifically made it a point to not react, assuming, well, maybe I'm just hearing shit. But then a few seconds after the sound, she said, "What was that?" and began to explain the same thing I heard. I've never had paranormal experiences, but no explanation on this one. Nothing in there could have made that sound. I am pretty sure that I saw a purple flash in the night sky. It lasted for maybe a half second and had a weird shape to it. I don't remember this myself, but I have been told that when I was 2 years old I made the house keys disappear. We had come home from the store and we were unloading groceries from the trunk of the car. Mom gave me the keys and told me to hold on to them while she lifted the 2 grocery bags out of the trunk. We were standing less than 1 meter apart. She turned away for 3 to 4 seconds, and when she turned back the keys were gone. We searched everywhere. The car, under the car, the bags, my clothes, her clothes, and the entire yard, which was just some gravel and a flat plain of grass. The keys were gone. We lived in that house for 14 more years and they never showed up again. This was in late 1989/early 1990, so we did not have cell phones. My grandparents lived just across the street and Grandma was home, so we waited at their house until my dad got home. When Granddad got home and heard the story, he thought it was hilarious. In 1991 we had just moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. The upcoming Miss Universe pageant was being held in our city that year. Our local newspaper was holding a contest. They had pictures of all 73 contestants. If you chose correctly who was going to win the Miss Universe crown, and submitted your guess by snail mail, you'd win a cash prize. I believe the prize was $100. I looked at the pictures and just knew that the winner would be Miss Mexico. Silly me didn't submit my choice to the local newspaper. I'm sure you may be able to guess who won Miss Universe. Lupita Jones, Miss Universe 1991 from Mexico. When I was a kid, we were chatting during dinner. My dad is a huge John Wayne fan and the conversation topic was The Searchers. At that point, I hadn't watched it. Someone couldn't remember Natalie Wood's role in the movie, and I contributed, Debbie, without thinking. It was the right answer. The thing is, The TV was showing an episode of Ricky Lake and the guest's name was Debbie, so I must have made a wild guess cause I felt left out. Not my story but a story that traveled around my high school. How much of it is true I can't say, but I think about it from time to time. Two junior boys who were kind of considered golden boys were out one night and missed a sharp turn and crashed into a tree, killing both instantly. Well, my older sister's best friend was dating one of the boys. Apparently he was close with her younger sister and the younger sister would always talk about how she wanted a cat with one blue eye and one green eye. Around the time of the funeral the little sister went into the garage and there was a stray kitten in there. One blue eye and one green eye. I like to hope the story is true. I was deer hunting one evening in a new spot. My dad's friend who also hunts on the same property had just put up a new hard blind which was sitting on top of a 7-foot platform he made. It sits on the back of the 180-some acres property overlooking two hayfields with woods surrounding them and behind the blind is woods. My dad sat in the front of the property which you cannot see and you have to take the dirt road to get where I am. I get in the blind and the entire hunt the hairs on the back of my neck were stood up and it felt like I was being watched from the woods behind. I sucked it up since I had a crossbow but something still kept saying inside me there's something there. Daylight hours run out, I have 8 does in front of me so I open the door as quiet as it can be. The does notice but it's too dark to see me from where they're at but they trot away farther into the hayfield. I shakily climb down still with the feeling of being watched. Now I do have a handheld thermal that I use to walk in and out. It cannot be mounted before anyone asks, so I looked through the woods and could not see any body heat. I get about 30 yards away from the stand and I just hear this most awful scream about where the stand is. It sounded like this wapple. I shot back so fast with the thermal up to my eye and nothing, just gray on the screen. Panicking at this point I start to fast walk and get about 80 yards away and next to the dirt road I hear the same scream again but this time it sounded only 20 yards away. Again I shot back with the thermal up to my eye but this time with my crossbow in the ready position and on fire. Nothing, absolutely nothing. At that point I turned back around and fast walked my butt. I have about 35 to 40 pounds of extra weight I'm carrying so I ain't running. Back to our truck with my crossbow still loaded and on fire and every 20 or so yards I would walk backwards and look through the thermal. It was also eerily silent the entire time. I get back to the truck and my dad is there and in the truck waiting. It is just a straight shot from the stand. He was into our truck while I had to walk about 3/4 mile down the dirt road with trees surrounding the entire walk. I shaken up, get my gear off and tell my dad everything and he just looked at me and said, "Wow, that is something." To this day I don't truly know what it was but my theory is I had an encounter with the grass man or as far of a stretch as a skinwalker. Now most people would never wish for it to happen again but I would love for it to happen again so this time I can get it on a recording. This is just one story of many that I have but this one is number 1 on my list of paranormal. It happened when I was 8 or 9 years old. I went to my cousin's village every vacation, and real shit was happening in her house. All the time something was moving and different sounds were heard. One evening our common older cousin came to us. We decided to conduct something like an experiment, put the doll on the floor in the next room. Then 2 hours later we went to see where this doll was lying, and she was lying on the windowsill. My cousin and I don't know what the hell was going on in the house even to this day. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.